been doing theological reflections for much of my life, although, of course, I would not have called it theological reflections. But ever since I was little, and I've been reflecting on the world, pondering the meaning of things. Developmental psychologists would probably call this intrapersonal knowledge or intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, or perhaps the knowledge of self. Growing up Unitarian Universalist meant that I was always pondering, always questioning, and searching for truth, trying to decide how people interacted and why they interacted the way they did, and making connections between those things. I learned about the 7 principles probably before I turned 7. And I was always asked to connect our faith's principles to everyday reasoning. My parents expected that I would use the principles as a tool when making decisions, and I have now relied on this practice for many years. It soon became habit for me to look for deeper meaning in everything around me, whether it was a school assignment or listening to a music album. I would look for more. I would seek deeper understanding, reminiscing on a conversation I had with my best friend, struggling to remain considerate through my divorce, or trying to determine how I was going to move across the country for yet another time. Every aspect of my life required greater decision making, required that I look to my faith and the ideals that I proclaimed were important to me. Although I would not have known what I was doing, I have been reflecting on theological concepts since I was a preteen. I decided that I wanted to go to seminary, that I wanted to become a minister, because while I was in my bachelor's degree studying to become a child psychologist, I was unable to stay away from my church. Evenings were spent going to committee meetings and hosting soulful sundown worships instead of being filled with homework and studies. Weekends were spent helping organize fundraisers and getting to bed on time to wake up for church. But I also spent much of my academic studies trying to engage my theological ideas. In one class on religious practices around death and dying, I wrote a paper about the worth and dignity of assisted dying practices. Now, this was many years ago, and some of the challenges that are being introduced now were not present at that time. In a psychotherapy and counseling class, I talked about the importance of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. No matter where I went or what I was studying, my faith and my values always seemed close at hand. And I was very happily engrossed when, as a seminary student, most of my assignments were asking me to find theological meaning in class readings or activities or even walks around my neighborhood. So it came as no surprise when I was asked to reflect on my theological understandings in a class called Unleashing Your Multicultural Ministry. The first day of class, we were asked to help decorate the altar that would be at the front of the room for our time together. My professor, who I would argue was more of a religious educator than a professor, and who really loved to incorporate different ways of learning into his curriculum, gave us 2 tasks to take home with us that first day. The first was to take home a river stone and write on it one word. The prompt that he gave to us was to think about a time when we were asked to experience someone else's culture and describe it in one word. For the second task, we were asked to take home several pipe cleaners and to create an image for us that would reflect God, spirit of life, the more ultimate reality. Choose whatever name suits you the best. So that night, I went home and I started contemplating what I wanted to create. There are many different times that I can think of when I had been invited to experience someone else's culture. Having participated in a youth group for Aboriginal girls, and then being a part of an interfaith clergy group. But because the class was based on ministry, and because I was dealing with particular emotions, it was only a week after Christmas holidays. I thought about my younger brother and his wedding, a wedding in a Greek Orthodox church after his conversion from Unitarian Universalism to his wife's religion. As I thought back about that experience, when my family was in town from all around the continent, and we were supposed to be celebrating my brother's union to the love of his life, I tried to remember what it was like to be invited into a new cultural experience. A wedding ceremony where the family members were asked to stand for the entire service, almost 2 hours long. Where the partnering ceremony happened at the back of the room under an arched doorway that was difficult for us to observe. Where the language was paternal and maybe even misogynistic, and the smell of strong frankincense filled the air. The one word that I could use to describe my experience was challenging. So I wrote challenging down on the river stone, not because the multicultural experience that I had was challenging, although it was a challenging experience, but because in those moments I was remembering the relationship that brought me into that experience. A relationship with my little brother, the boy that I protected at school from bullies, the preteen who was my confidant when secrets needed to be kept from our parents, the teenager who I rode in an ambulance with after he cut open his thigh while skateboarding, and the young man who left behind those 7 principles because he fell in love with someone who disagreed with them. As all of these memories overwhelmed me and the complexity of emotion washed over me, all I could write down on that worn and smooth river stone was challenging. The second task that we were given that cold January evening in Chicago was to create an image of God with pipe cleaners. Now, I'm not a theist. I don't think I've ever really been a theist. I grew up a Unitarian in a fellowship community, and I listened to the stories of Jesus and God like they were fairy tales. For me, the stories from the Bible held the same symbolism of love and morals that Winnie the Pooh stories held. And it wasn't until I was a preteen that I actually discovered that Jesus was a real man who had really existed and really lived through some of those struggles. Before this, he was just a character in my Sunday school classes. But at the time of my class, I had spent 2.5, almost 3 years in seminary, working through my theological reflections, and this gave me permission to claim a belief in God. Not a Christian sense of the word, because I'm still not a theist, but using the word God to mean more than just a deity, to mean more than a proper noun. Now, I know that Wikipedia is not considered the most reliable source for information, but I'm going to introduce it here anyways. It states the concept of God as described by many theologians, commonly includes the attributes of omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, divine simplicity, and as having an eternal and necessary existence. In the same wiki article, God has also been described as incorporeal, the source of all moral obligation, and the greatest conceivable being in existence. And while the Christian God can be described using all of these words, and I'm sure that many other gods around the world, many other ways in which people experience God, are also used to define this idea. So I believe that God is relationships. The being that I recognize as all-knowing, ever-present, and all-powerful. It's the concept that holds my moral obligation and the greatest being in our existence. It's the relationships. They underlie everything. Whether it is my individual relationship with each of you, or the special relationships that are created by this group of people on the screen together, or the relationship that I have with myself or with the earth, it doesn't really matter. It's the relationship that's important. How we are in that relationship, how we engage the other or how we don't, how we hold the other's emotion and logic, how we choose to change our behavior because of the relationship, or how we choose to ignore the relationship by not changing. This is my God. And though relationships are not a personal being, they are divinely simple, and their existence is necessary. Relationships hold my moral obligations, and I believe that it is the greatest conceivable existence. And much like the Christian God, I believe that relationships can be misunderstood, misrepresented, and sometimes even abused. So in order to create an image with pipe cleaners for my assignment, I created two people holding hands to show the space between them, the relationship that I see as God. I took my two objects back to class the next morning. We were all asked to share the meaning behind our words, our images, and then we spent the rest of our class time together building an understanding of ministry based on our experiences of different cultures and our understanding of God. It was a really great class, and I learned so many things, so many tools to add to my toolbox. And yet there was a deeper meaning hidden in those two objects that I would soon discover. I took the two pieces of art back to my apartment at the end of class, and I left them on the kitchen table. That night, my roommates, all of whom were seminarians, we were staying together at the local hostel. We were all milling about, and somebody was trying to get my pipe cleaner people to stand up. I had given them feet, but they were a little bit lopsided, and they wouldn't stand on their own. But one of my roommates accomplished the task by placing the challenging rock on top of their feet. And this is where my theological light bulb went off, when I saw the two ideas come together and become one. Now, if I were to give fancy words to my theology, it would be called process relationality. And what that means is that I believe that the most basic and fundamental entity in our world is made up of relationships, and that we need to treat them as sacred. Relationality. And I also believe that these relationships are always in process, changing and shifting and moving, and that we put them through that process by putting energy into the relationships or by ignoring them, holding them as sacred or mundane, believing in the power that they hold over their lives and the existence of our world. We are able to change and develop or de-evolve these relationships. And I believe that this theology is incredibly challenging, that I am required to constantly be vigilant with my ideas and my words and my actions, that everything that I do has an effect not only on my future, but on the future of this world. And that is really, really challenging, and it can be heavy to carry. It is really challenging to put that kind of pressure on me and on those around me and on the world. But no one ever told me that my faith was easy. And I hope nobody ever told you that faith is easy. It is like Oriah Mountain Dream's poem, The Invitation. I want to know what you ache for. I want to know if you will risk looking the fool for love. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow. I want to know if you can sit with pain, with joy, with disappointment. When we learn to share ourselves, when we learn to be in deeper relationship, even though it will be challenging, and even though it is so scary to be vulnerable, we can only grow from that experience. We will be able to build up the layers, and we will be able to grow more cells, and we will become larger constellations. And so over the next week, I give you an invitation, or perhaps a challenge, and it will start during our breakout rooms today. What does God look like to you? If you were to create an image of the sacred, what would that image be? Tell each other. Let us get to know each other better. Maybe find some pipe cleaners, or your paints and a canvas, or whatever type of visual art you feel called to do, and create an image of the divine, and then share that image with someone. Strengthen the relationship that you have by sharing a precious idea with them. Let us make this so. Thank you.